This is a typical Western teenager from the 90s. He plays basketball, cheers for the Chicago Bulls team, is a fan of Air Maxes and Michael Jordan.
Jordan, he blows by Pearson. It reels rolling. Number 23's in the house.
He studies in prestigious schools in Switzerland, goes to Disneyland, speaks several languages, and enjoys all the achievements and values of Western civilization. His classmates know him as Park Ewan, and so he, so modest and educated, becomes the leader of a small country. He promises to improve the lives of ordinary people, organizes grandiose construction projects, and the world learns his real name, Kim Jong-un. He creates for his country a reliable nuclear defense, and for himself unlimited power, for the sake of which he is ready to do anything, to massacre his uncle and any opposition, to close the borders like none of his predecessors, to strangle any information about the Western world, where he in fact grew up and was brought up. Today, North Korea is a territory of absolute secrecy. It is virtually impossible to break out of there. But the paradox is that those who manage to do so are still proud of their homeland, even if they fear and flee from it. Why does a country that is constantly under sanctions, and sometimes simply cannot feed its own population, create atomic weapons? Why has the DPRK not collapsed like the Soviet Union or the regimes of Eastern Europe, but also not let capitalists in like China or Vietnam? And most importantly, how does Kim Jong-un manage to hold on to power in such a way that 25 million North Koreans no longer remember that their country was ruled by anyone other than the Kim dynasty? So North Korea, or more correctly, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, has existed for 76 years, 7 years longer than the mighty USSR. But note that the Soviet Union was led by 7 people. North Korea has only been ruled by 3 men in that time: Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il, and now Kim Jong-un. As is not hard to guess from their last names, they are related. Grandfather, father, and son. North Korea is the personal regime of one particular family that has somehow kept the multi-million-dollar country under control for all these 76 years. How do they manage to do that? Let's go back 70 years. That is how American planes, sparing no bombs, leveled Pyongyang, the capital of the DPRK.
900 tons of bombs rained down on a 20-square-mile area before the bombardier signals, mission accomplished.
During the 3 years of the Korean War, about 200,000 bombs were dropped on Pyongyang, about 1 for each resident. This man, Curtis LeMay, commander of the Strategic Air Forces of the United States, reporting that his pilots had burned down every house in North Korea. He then complained to his superiors that they no longer had targets because, in addition to residential buildings, they had destroyed dams, rivers flooded fields, and destroyed North Korean crops. Those who are familiar with history will write that North Korea itself attacked South Korea, and had it not been for American troops, Kim Il-sung and his army would have taken over the entire Korean peninsula. You are right, that is indeed true. But for those not in the know, here is a summary of events. After World War II, Korea was divided into 2 parts, communists in the north and pro-American comrades in the south. On June 25, 1950, North Korean troops invaded South Korea and seized 90% of its territory, except for a small piece of land near the port of Busan. American troops, along with the UN, helped the Southerners resist, went on a counteroffensive and practically took over the north, destroying everything in their path with air power. But China and the USSR did not want to see the American imperialists at their borders. They put troops and air power into the DPRK, and by the 51st year the war was back where it started, but to the border drawn along the 38th parallel. And in 1953 the parties finally ran out of steam and signed a truce. Since then, and to this day, there have been 2 countries on the map, North and South Korea. The latter has been actively supported by the United States for many years, receiving financial aid, technology, and protection. North Korea, on the other hand, has been supported by China and the Soviet Union. Throughout this time, until 1994, the country is ruled by Kim Il-sung. From a wartime leader to more than just a great leader like Stalin, Korean propaganda elevates him to the son of the nation and effectively makes him the god of North Korea. How does he do it? Remember, I started by saying that American planes scorched the entire country and its inhabitants, naturally, hid from the bombing underground. Agreed, this cannot be called a victory. But Kim Il-sung is holding a military parade on the ruins of his own capital and celebrating victory in the patriotic war of liberation, which he himself started by attacking his neighbor. He knows full well that there is a Soviet Union ready to come to his aid at any moment. From friendly communist countries, engineers, architects, consultants in all spheres of social life will go to Korea. They rebuild the DPRK. and it begins to develop even faster than its southern neighbor. Kim Il-sung's authority is growing. The new spacious city is also growing, which, by the way, looks very much like East Berlin or Moscow. And what is important, all this exemplary urban socialist paradise appears in a country where recently 80% of the population were peasants. Of course, they are surprised and delighted. And under this patriotic noise, Kim Il-sung massacres all the opposition, forms his cult of personality, the cult of the father of the nation. And here is the key point that propaganda at all times and in any country uses with great pleasure. It's the concern for children. Just so you understand, Pyongyang will lose about 1 million people in the Korean War. That's a lot. And when the population of a country is only 10 million, that's a lot. Now imagine how many orphans are left after this war.
Kids are the ones who always suffer most. They never know what's going on or why. And how can you explain to them after they've just seen their whole family get killed?
What does Kim Il-sung do? He orders the building of orphanages and schools for the children. The orphans are fed, clothed, cared for, educated. And at the same time, they are raised in the spirit that their father is now Kim himself. A prime example is the Manjeongdae School for Orphan Children of Revolutionaries. It will be opened in the place where Kim Il-sung was born. Its graduates will become the future elite of the armed forces and state security services. That is, the leader strategically nurtures those on whom he will rely. Now look carefully at these propaganda pictures, mosaic statues. In them, Kim Il-sung seems to be not only a father, but also a loving mother. That's how carefully he clutches to his lush-chest children, wounded soldiers, peasants, and old people. And this is no accident. These are the values on which any religion, cult, or sect stands. It tries to replace the family. Well, let's understand why the state is trying to replace the family. Family is what? Care. Kim Il-sung takes care of everyone. But family is also security, and that's where the issue of nuclear weapons comes in, or rather the desire to get them. And we return again to the brutal American bombings. A tougher option on the part of the United States would have been to drop not hundreds of thousands of bombs on Pyongyang, but a few nuclear warheads, as they did at the end of World War II with Japan. You've probably heard of the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is what they looked like after one single explosion.
The Commercial Museum was also within 2/10 of a mile of 0 point, and the garden wall facing the blast was bent inward by the push of the explosion.
By the way, it was these American nuclear threats that essentially stopped the Korean War. What does Kim Il-sung do? He realizes that at any moment the Americans could do to him what they did to Japan. And as the war that just ended shows, allies do not always come to the rescue quickly. So he sends his scientists for knowledge and training in Dubna, near Moscow, to the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research.
Здесь живут и работают сотрудники Объединенного института ядерных исследований, ученые Албании, Болгарии, Венгрии, Вьетнама, демократических республик Германии и Кореи.
And in 1964, with the help of the USSR and North Korea's Yongbyon, they created their own nuclear research center and even installed a Soviet reactor there. But it was not yet a bomb. But Moscow is in no hurry to transfer technology because 2 years earlier in 1962, the Cuban Missile Crisis happens. What's that? First, the Americans placed their nuclear missiles in Turkey. Naturally, the USSR didn't like it because it was too close to its own borders, and they responded by placing missiles in Cuba. The states don't like that. They block the island. And in fact, 2 weeks the whole world is waiting for the beginning of nuclear war between the USSR and the USA. But President Kennedy and General Secretary Khrushchev come to an agreement. The Soviets take their missiles from Cuba in exchange for the Americans not invading Fidel Castro and removing their nuclear warheads from Turkey. The deal is done and war has not broken out. Everyone is happy except the DPRK, because there they finally realize that the USSR, in the interest of its own security, can surrender its allies. Therefore, it is useless to wait for help, and we have to develop nuclear and any other weapons ourselves. As a result, the share of the national budget for the military-industrial complex in North Korea increases from a paltry 4.5% in 1956 to 30% in 1966. What happens next? The saved people of North Korea begin to regard Kim Il-sung as a literal saint. He defended the country, won the war, united the people, fed them. There used to be hunger and disease, but now there are hospitals and clinics on every corner, at least in Pyongyang. But from here on, things will be very complicated. The USSR will collapse, China will take a course to the west, aid will be reduced, Kim Il-sung will die, and the terrible famine of the 90s will begin. But even under these difficult conditions, the Kims will remain in power. How? The Kim regime is actually very calculating, otherwise it wouldn't have lasted this long. Look, in the 90s, when there is a terrible famine in the country, and there is no support either from the dead USSR or from semi-capitalist China, the UN will start sending humanitarian aid to the country. And the main donors in this story will be North Korea's main enemies, the US and South Korea. But even this is not enough, and the DPRK government is forced to soften the regime and allow private trade. Improvised markets appear, and smuggling is active. State-owned factories are closed, but men go to work because the party says so. But they do not earn anything there, and their wives become the main entrepreneurs. According to Korean tradition, they are supposed to stay at home and raise the children. But since the children have to be saved from starvation, they go into commerce. As a result, private business is growing. But letting it grow too much is dangerous. The regime may collapse, just like it happened to the USSR. And that's where Kim Jong-il, makes a wise move. To maintain his power, he relies on the army and proclaims the Songun policy. That is, the army is in first place. There are two reasons for this. Firstly, the armed forces of North Korea outnumber even the Russian ones. And this is despite the fact that North Korea's population is 5 times smaller and its territory 142 times smaller. And if the military lives poorly, they will be dissatisfied. And since they always have a weighty argument in the form of weapons, they can easily topple the regime. There is a second reason. Kim Jong-il just came to power after the death of his father, and he needs to raise his own prestige. The army doesn't have much respect for him, and it's not because he walks in heels or wears glasses like Liza Minnelli, and then even wins a ranking of the top 25 best men who look like old lesbians. It's just that Kim Jong-il never had real military experience like his father. Before becoming the national leader, he was engaged in propaganda, not war. And to keep the military from eating him up, it was important to him to butter up the power bloc and give them more power, to increase the defense budget, to make the military first in line for cash subsidies or food. The question arises, why invest money in an expensive nuclear program? The answer is simple. This is a way to avoid Gaddafi's fate. For those who don't know, there was a dictator in Libya. When the country plunged into civil war, NATO troops intervened and successfully eliminated him. The conclusion is this: if you do not have nuclear protection, then at any moment your country can be invaded and you can be overthrown and killed. It is obvious that today Kim Jong-un does not plan to launch nuclear weapons first. That would be suicide, because America's response is sure to follow. However, the availability of stocks of nuclear missiles capable of reaching Washington serves as a deterrent, preventing Washington from interfering in North Korea's affairs. As they say, there is no better means of defense than a hydrogen bomb and its means of delivery. The second argument, as always, is propaganda. Kim Jong-un is now telling the people of his country, look at how strong and developed our state has become under my leadership. We are threatening the United States itself. In general, there is a universal theory according to which any power will exist indefinitely. Such power must have 3 strong supports. The first pillar, it must be liked by the common people. For this purpose, there is propaganda in North Korea that tells pathos stories about great leaders, and that North Korea is surrounded by enemies on all sides. And only the leaders know how to protect it. The second pillar, it's the military. And most importantly, it's the top military officials. They should live in prosperity, and the Kims have done everything for that. And the third component is that big business should be on the side of the government. You will say, wow, this is North Korea, what kind of business? And here is the thing. Under Kim Jong-il, when the screws had to be loosened, a new class of people emerged, who are now called Tongju, lords of money. These are top Labor Party officials, military leaders, and those who run state-owned companies in Korea or do business overseas. These are officials who try to attract investment or earn foreign currency in North Korea. Security officers and married women who do not work for the state but may, as it turns out, engage in private commerce. And today, all these guys have enough money to feel good enough. And we're not talking about North Korean won. These people are earning and spending hostile American dollars. You look at this and realize that Kim Jong-un is using the classic scheme that Niccolo Machiavelli described in his books. Don't worry about the people as a whole, but attract a small group of chosen ones to your side. And conditionally 1% of the population in North Korea lives very well. They drive decent cars, they vacation at nice resorts inside their country. The last Kim built ski slopes, various sports stadiums, and even Western clothes flowed into the country, if not by a river, then by a decent stream. And these comrades cling to the Kim's power because it gives them everything. Specific example: the automobile industry of the DPRK. North Koreans are trying to make copies of various Western and Chinese cars. Imagine that you are the owner of such a factory, and your cars are thinly, but they are sold, and you make good money on it. And then imagine that this iron curtain collapses. What will happen to your factory? Will it be able to compete with the South Korean or at least Chinese car industry? Remember what happened to ZIL or the Hungarian Icarus after the collapse of the Soviet Union? But they were produced in multi-million copies and were everywhere. That is, the Kim regime for such people is a guarantee of their good way of life, and Kim himself needs them, which is why they essentially sponsor his regime. Here's another example. Everyone makes fun of the North Korean state company Air Koryo, which flies on old islands. In fact, it's the world's worst carrier with only one flight a day. That's true. But within their own country, they own a cab service, a network of gas stations, and a travel agency, and produce their own brand of cigarettes and canned goods, all with permission from above. Such a public-private partnership where the government removes the hemorrhoids for production, logistics, and sales, but at the same time controls and takes a part of the money, and it takes a lot of it. Look, according to South Korean intelligence estimates, there are 33 residences of Kim Jong-un in North Korea. 28 of them have railroad stations. The residences are surrounded by several fences, connected by underground tunnels, and, of course, there are bunkers where the leader can hide from any attack. Now, watch this clip here. In 2018, the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, shows it to Kim in a private meeting. The point is this: Comrade Kim, we are ready to give you and your country all the opportunities of our investment and capitalism. We will pour so much money in that your Pyongyang will be as good as Miami. You want it to be like China or Vietnam. The Communist Party retains political power, but the economy is capitalist. Or let's do it like Japan. They're the third economy in the world. We control them too, but they have a constitutional monarchy. But let's not have those missiles, okay? It's a tempting offer, and a lot of countries have agreed. Even the ones with nuclear weapons. But Kim Jong-un already has all this luxury, and he understands perfectly well that the guarantee of its preservation is the nuclear weapons, and giving it up gives no guarantees at all. The multi-billion-dollar business sharks will devour him and his system in a matter of years. Kim Jong-un himself was born in his 82nd year and was old enough to remember the collapse of the USSR and the communist regime in Eastern Europe. Plus, he was educated in Switzerland and knows Western values and the layout from the inside. Remember, I said that young Kim was a fan of basketball and the Chicago Bulls? Well, when he first came to power, few people in the States knew what to expect from a fat man with a weird haircut. The Obama administration even had the option of sending Michael Jordan to North Korea, but he refused. Diplomats said that he was allegedly afraid of flying.
One of the most iconic images ever of Air Jordan.
In the end, Dennis Rodman will agree, a man who has always agreed to all sorts of exorbitant tin. He ends up making several trips to Pyongyang, not only to play basketball, but also to drink with Kim in person. He even sings him a birthday greeting.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
And in some ways, basketball diplomacy definitely helps. The world will see that Americans are not immediately shot upon arrival on North Korean soil, and that North Koreans play basketball pretty well. But in fact, for both countries, this is simply a show for the domestic audience. After several rounds, the friendship between Kim and Rodman ends, because there was exactly zero sincerity in it. Why would anyone need a country's leader and the country itself, which ranks at the very bottom in all possible ratings? Is it really that attractive? Only as a threat that needs to be eliminated. Kim Jong-un and his predecessors have done everything right for themselves to stay on the throne. They eliminated all rivals within the country, invented an ideology that works, acquired effective nuclear defense, and formed a circle of people who are keenly interested in keeping the Kims in power. All of this corresponds to the famous phrase, "Let a few get rich first." Do you know who said it? Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader who launched grand economic reforms. And it is essentially thanks to him that China embarked on the path to becoming a leading economy in the world. But the truth is that this phrase has a second part that many forget. Let a few get rich first, and gradually everyone should get rich. But the talent of the ideal dictator lies in preventing that from happening. It is necessary to constantly scare those who have money, making them believe that without him, without the ruler, they will become poor, and those who have no money must not be allowed to starve. But they also must not be allowed to get rich, otherwise they will learn too much and assert their rights to power. If you liked the content, don't forget to react with likes and reposts. Well, until the future.